guys, a little bit of a Tooltip Tuesday where we're going to change some diff fluid in a rear end. Specifically, this is a 2003 Chevy Silverado. They're just really going to work the same in any of your Dodge, Ford, and Chevy trucks. For the most part, all your SUVs, full-size rear ends basically are going to be just about the same. They may differ from 10 bolts to 12 bolts to 14 bolts and so on. But for the most part, taking the diff covers off, cleaning them up, putting gaskets on them, and refilling them with diff fluid is all going to be about the same. We're going to talk about different diff fluids and what we're putting in it, as well as some other tips and tricks. So stick around and we'll get to it. A couple of things before we get started here. Number one, looks like somebody got cute, put a little smiley face here on the diff cover, so that's just wonderful. The other thing, you kind of want to get a good idea of why are we replacing the gasket anyway. A lot of times when you start seeing residual right here, it's not this diff cover gasket, it's actually the pinion seal on the front side that's leaking down. And when we first saw this dripping, I was thinking, oh man, I'm gonna have to put a pinion seal in here. But that was not the case. The pinion side is dry. I'll show you that here in one moment. And this is all wet, so that tells me it is this diff cover gasket, which, hey, is a pretty easy gasket to change, as well as, you know, that's a great time to go ahead and change the diff fluid, inspect the gears in there, see if you've got any wear, premature wear, and go from there. So first thing we want to do, I like to clean this up just a little bit. So I'll just take some paper towels. And by the way, this is the Chevy 8 lug, so 3/4 ton. It's actually a 1500 HD, but it's a 3/4 ton axle, so it's a 14 bolt. What you would consider a GM 14 bolt. So I'm using the Felpro RDS 55387. I'll have a link in the description for this, but pretty common gasket for any of your 14 bolt late model rear ends, or a lot of them anyway. I'm just going to take a paper towel here, and I'm just going to kind of wipe off any of this excess residual. There's no reason to get this in all my sockets and everything else. And I'm not going to take a lot of time to care about this because we'll degrease it and clean it up and everything else. But why not just take some time to get a lot of this out of there. And you may take a screwdriver or a scraper to do it as well. And that should do it. I just wanted to get a lot of that caked on stuff out of the way of my sockets. Make sure I get a good seal on my socket, or a good bite on my socket when I get it on there, so I'm not stripping any bolts. Looks like we got some silicone squeezing out of there, so we know they probably put silicone on here. Now here's my kind of, not necessarily pet peeve, but one of my likes I like to do is I'll go and actually clean this oil pan out. So whatever I'm going to drain my fluid in, I want it to be nice and clean, not necessarily spick and span, but as clean as I can get it, because when I drain this, I want to be able to fish anything out if I drop something in it, or if I see something bad, I want to be able to kind of inspect that fluid to see if we got any problems with it. And if I have a bunch of junk in here already, I really can't tell what came from my pan or what came from the diff fluid. Same with cleaning a lot of this out. If I'm keeping it too gunked up and stuff drains in here, then a lot of that residual may be falling in from the outside, and I don't want to do that. All right, now that we have our pan nice and clean, I'm using my, my service tray here so that we can kind of keep this close to the rear end. In our case, we have a drain right here underneath what we call the pumpkin, or the center of the diff. And you can pull out, it's basically a 3/8 ratchet. You can stick an extension in there, or the ratchet anvil, and back that out and be able to drain that fluid before you pull this diff cover off. Other rear ends, you'll have to actually break these nuts or bolts free and then separate the actual cover to drain the fluid out. But we can drain the majority of the fluid out before we have to do that. And by the way, there's also another plug up here that you can provide air for draining that fluid, as well as that's where you'll put your fluid in. Okay, so as I was mentioning, the little plug right here, which now I'm dumping all kind of sand back into my pan. We'll clean that up in a second. And then I might as well go ahead, and looks like this one's pretty clean, but go ahead and clean those out because you want a good seat in there before you stick your ratchet or extension in there. And this stuff is nice and stinky, so you want to get as little as possible on you. Okay, and since we've drained everything, we really don't have to be careful of taking these bolts out. We can just go ahead and loosen all these up and then should be able to zip these out. And just keep track of which ones have your brackets on them. Well, I think somebody was trying to hide a broken bolt. Wow, siliconed in there. Move this bracket out of the way. Leave that top one in there. Now, if we didn't have those drain holes to drain it, I would probably start from down here and do like half the bottom ones and then break it free with a pry bar to let it drain, which will still get some residual draining out. If it's siliconed on, you might have to take a little putty knife. Okay, so this is when you definitely want to inspect the cover, which this thing is pretty clean, other than, again, it looks like it's been low on fluid. You've got another magnet right here, by the way, which you can inspect, make sure there's not a ton of stuff on, and then make sure you clean all your mess out as well. I'll put it right here in the cover so it doesn't get my oil or my Diff lube. Otherwise, looks pretty clean. Gear's getting some wear. There's no real sharp edges, and I don't see any broken teeth, so it looks pretty good. I think we'll put some oil back in it and let her ride. All right, so since my Diff fluid was clean, I didn't really have any trash in it or any metal particulate that concerned me. I can go ahead and clean the rest of this, let it fall into my pan. I'm not too concerned about it. And I'll do the same on the Diff cover as I am doing to the rear end here. And that is just take an old razor blade and clean up any residual on as far as the RTV goes. And then once I clean up that residual a good bit, I don't have to get all of it, because then I can come back with a roll-lock disc and clean up the rest of it. And then I'll hit it. And then we'll hit it with some brake cleaner or some acetone, something to really clean that up. And you may want to take a rag and put it over your ring gear if you want to keep the trash out of there. It's probably not a bad idea to do. Or you can be careful and just not have anything fall on it. But probably the smartest to cover it up. So we just cleaned up the rear diff cover a little bit, and we'll shoot some paint on it just to make it look at least uniform. Well, that's not going to win any awards, but it'll work. All right, so we've got our Felpro gasket, we've got our diff cover painted up and ready to put the gasket on. We're going to tack it up a little bit, and let's get get this out of here. I just about cut my gasket, didn't I? We'll use our cardboard here. And let's line this up. Okay. Flip this over. Just a little gasket tack. Let that sit a second. And you can use a little silicone if you want to. Here in Central Florida, it tacks up pretty quick, and then you want to make sure that you got your holes in the right location, or the gasket oriented correctly, I guess I should say. All right, let's do a final cleanup here. All right, so we're going to put these bolts back in, put the cover back on, put the bolts back in, put our plug back in, and then we'll fill this thing with fluid. I did have a broken bolt right up here at the very top. I'm not going to worry about drilling that out right now since it's at the top. I think we're going to seal fine. And once we get the cover on, that should give me some protection so I can drill that out without metal shavings falling everywhere. But again, if it seals without leaking, then I may not even worry about that. I know that's terrible. If that was a customer's car, obviously I would. Since it's our shop truck, we're going to probably let it ride, see how it does. Now while we had it off, we went ahead and chased all these threads with a thread chaser to make sure they're nice and clean. And let's go ahead up here. Gonna just barely snug these up, getting the cover up to the rear end. That's it. All right. Now, actually, we forgot something. I was going to blue Loctite each one of these, so we're going to back each one out and blue Loctite it. Our Smalley face is gone, but it looks like I just scarred up my my newly freshly painted black, and we can see the red through there. Oh well, it shall serve its purpose. Now let's get the blue Loctite on here. All right, so GM specs that these covers should be torqued at 30 foot-pounds. So I've got them all nice and snug, and I've got my torque wrench set to 30 foot-pounds. And so I'll just use my best crisscross star pattern, whatever you want to say. You always want to go back over all these to verify that you see, like that one, either you missed it or as you tighten the rest of the diff cover up, it's remained loose. So I always, especially something like this, go over just to verify that you're hitting the numbers on all of them. So I'll go ahead and tighten up my drain plug. Now we can put the fluid in it. All right, so now we need to fill it from this hole here, and basically we're going to fill this until it starts running out of this hole. Some of the newer rear ends have a plug up at the top that you can refill these with. This does not, so we're filling it from here. And we're running a Lucas fully synthetic gear oil. You do not have to have friction modifiers in this rear end. This is the G80 in the truck, which is different than, I believe some of the cars had G80s as well. But this one is different. It runs a different type of limited slip, different type of clutch pack, if you will. So it does not require friction modifiers, even though I believe this Lucas stuff has it built in. But sometimes friction modifiers can actually cause more noise. Get into those details at a later time. But anyway, so I'm going to put the snout in here. And we'll try not to make too big of a mess. And we already are. And bottle number 2. And if you said something like, Tim, you forgot to put the brackets on, you're exactly right. I forgot to put the brackets on. And this should be the last bottle, and it shouldn't need this full bottle. So we shall see. And I believe there it comes right there. Yep. The floodgates have opened. Put our plug in. So now I'll go back after I've got everything sealed up, hit it with some brake clean to make sure we don't have any residual, because then that's going to make it easy to see if we actually have any leaks after a good test drive and after it's sitting here for a bit. Okay, so that's not a terribly difficult job to change this diff cover gasket. Doing the pinion seals, quite a bit extensive compared to this, but this is just pretty much, stay clean, take care of your stuff, clean it up, get the old fluid out, and get it refilled. Make sure you put the gasket on correctly. If you're going to use just an RTV, then that's fine, and many people do. But if you're going to use a gasket, not gasket an RTV. One or the other, choose your pick. I would rather see a gasket on there if the gasket's going to seal, as long as the diff cover looks good. I would rather use a gasket, because now I can pull that off at least in a short time period and be able to reuse that if I need to, whereas RTV, it's a lot of cleanup. Also, stuff like this where that bolt was broke and they literally glued it on with RTV. I mean, literally, you could tell the hole was stuffed with RTV and they just stuck the head of the bolt back on there. Don't do stuff like that. I would say mainly the thing you really need to do in doing this, if you're doing it yourself, then do some research for yourself so you know what type of fluid to put in it. Also, if you're doing this for someone else, if this is for a customer, these different trucks require different types of fluid. They have different types of lockers and posi-traction unit. That's kind of a GM term, but still many people just call them posis. They run different types of fluid, and depending on the age, the body style of the truck, the weight of the truck. This is a 1500 HD, which is really like a 3/4 ton running gear. But the G80 axle was used in a lot of these trucks. But the positive traction unit, or the limited slip unit, or the locker unit that's installed in here works differently than the old, friction only plate units did. They have Has like a flywheel in here that actually kicks the locker out once you get up to 20 miles an hour, and also at the slower speeds it recognizes when the RPMs differentiate between the wheels, and it actually locks those clutches in, providing that positive traction or that dual wheel pull. But these new G80s do not require friction modifiers like a lot of your muscle cars and things. When you go to put posis in those, you need to add a friction modifier or like an LS additive, things like that. This does not require that. So educate yourself on what unit you're actually working on. And like in this case, I'm running a synthetic gear oil from Lucas. It is GL5 rated, so that's most of your GM stuff wants to see that GL5 rating for the lubrication. As well as this has a friction modifier built into it. I think we'll be okay. But what happens on these units that don't require friction modifiers, a lot of times you can make them loud. So they'll start trying to lock up, turning corners, and you'll hear that chatter in the rear end, and that's because you've got friction modifiers in there when you don't need it, or you have too much. So you can be in a case where friction modifiers actually add to the noise or create chatter, and the opposite side of that is when a rear end or a diff requires that friction modifier, you don't put it in there, then you could have slippage, and that's really something you don't want either. So again, do your research, get on some forums. A lot of these old GM engineers, Ford engineers, Dodge engineers are sitting on those forums and just having fun answering people, and they'll link you to old documents, things like that. So again, I can't stress that enough. Educate yourselves on the rear end or the differential that you're working on. Other than that, pretty easy to zip these bolts out, clean it all up, put new diff fluid in there, and make sure you clean it up real well so you can tell when you have leaks and when you don't. So hey, keep track of us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And if you don't mind, would you hit that like and subscribe button, but only if you liked our video. As always, if you hated our video, give us a thumbs down. But would you let us know in the comments why? Have a great day. Keep smiling.